I stood in the marble lobby of the Grand Riverside Hotel, staring at the golden invitation in my trembling hands, and realized that tonight I would destroy the woman who was about to marry my brother. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had no idea that the stinky country girl she'd spent years mocking now owned every gleaming tile beneath her designer heels, every crystal chandelier that would illuminate her humiliation, every security camera that would record her downfall. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how a girl from Millbrook Farm became the silent architect of the city's most spectacular social massacre. My name is Elena Hayes, and 10 years ago, I was nobody. I grew up in Millbrook, a farming community 3 hours outside the city where the nearest Starbucks was a 40-minute drive, and dressing up meant clean jeans without mud stains. My parents owned a small dairy farm, nothing fancy. Just 60 acres of rolling hills, 23 cows with names like Buttercup and Daisy, and a red barn that desperately needed repainting. My brother James was 5 years older than me. Growing up, he was my hero. He taught me how to fish in Miller's Creek, how to drive the tractor when I was barely tall enough to reach the pedals, how to stand up to Tommy Bradford when he pulled my braids in 3rd grade. James was smart, scary smart. While I struggled through algebra, he breezed through advanced calculus like he was reading a children's book. He got a full scholarship to Preston University, one of those prestigious schools where the annual tuition cost more than our farm made in a good year. I remember the day he left for college. I was 13, standing in our dusty driveway, trying not to cry as he loaded his beat-up Honda Civic with everything he owned. "Take care of Mom and Dad," he said, pulling me into a hug that smelled like the Old Spice cologne he'd started wearing. "I'll come back for you, Ellie. I promise. Once I make it in the city, I'll bring you there too." I believed him completely. For the first 2 years, James came home every holiday. He'd tell us stories about his classes, his internships, the incredible people he was meeting. Mom would make his favorite pot roast, and Dad would sit quietly in his chair, radiating pride even though he never said much. Then James met her, Victoria Ashford. He brought her home for Thanksgiving during his junior year. I was 15, awkward in that special teenage way, all gangly limbs, braces, and a haircut I'd given myself that made me look like a rejected member of a boy band. Victoria stepped out of James's newly leased BMW. When had he gotten a BMW? Wearing cream-colored pants that probably cost more than our monthly grocery budget and heels so high I couldn't understand how she walked in them. She was beautiful. I'll give her that. Honey blonde hair that fell in perfect waves, the kind of tan that came from expensive vacations rather than working outdoors, and a smile that showed impossibly white teeth. "James has told me so much about the farm," she said, her voice like honey drizzled over broken glass. "It's so rustic." The way she said rustic made it sound like diseased. I tried. God, I tried to like her. I showed her around the farm, introduced her to the cows, offered to teach her how to collect eggs from the chicken coop. She declined everything with that same crystalline smile, then disappeared into our bathroom for an hour. When she emerged, she'd changed into different clothes apparently. Barn smell had permeated her outfit. At dinner she picked at Mom's pot roast, like it might poison her, then spent the entire meal talking about her father's real estate empire, her mother's charity galas, and the little vacation home her family owned in the Hamptons. "You must visit us sometime," she said to my parents in a tone that made it clear she hoped they never would. "Our main house has 8 bedrooms. I'm sure we could find space." After dinner, I found her in our living room, photographing our worn furniture and faded wallpaper. She didn't see me watching as she sent the pictures to someone with a message. I could just barely read over her shoulder. "Can you believe this is where he grew up? It's like a time capsule of poverty." Too funny. My stomach twisted. I wanted to tell James. I almost did, a dozen times that weekend. But every time I tried, I'd see the way he looked at her like she was something precious and impossible, like he couldn't quite believe she'd chosen him. And the words would die in my throat. Besides, I told myself, maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe she was just adjusting. Maybe city people needed time to appreciate country life. I was so fucking naive. Over the next year, Victoria's visits became less frequent. James stopped coming home for every holiday. First, It was just Thanksgiving he missed. Then Christmas. Then Easter. Victoria's family has this tradition, he'd explain over crackling phone calls. Her parents are throwing this huge party. I can't miss it, Ellie. These are important connections. Important connections. The words tasted bitter even secondhand. When James did visit, he was different. He'd traded his casual jeans for pressed slacks. He corrected Dad's grammar at dinner. He looked uncomfortable in our small farmhouse, like it didn't fit him anymore. Or maybe we didn't fit him anymore. The real breaking point came during the summer after my junior year of high school. James had just graduated from Preston and landed some hotshot position at a consulting firm in the city. He came home to celebrate, bringing Victoria with him. I'd grown into myself a bit by then. My braces were off, I'd figured out how to manage my curly hair, and I'd started running track, which gave me confidence I'd never had before. I wasn't pretty like Victoria, I'd never be that, but I'd stopped feeling like an ugly duckling. We were having a barbecue in the backyard. Nothing fancy, just burgers, corn on the cob, Dad's questionable potato salad that he swore was award-winning despite having never entered any contests. I was helping Mom set out plates when I heard Victoria's voice from around the corner of the house. She was on her phone, standing by her car, probably getting something from the trunk. I don't know how much longer I can do this, Ashley, she was saying. Yes, I know James has potential, but my God, his family. They're so provincial. Did you see that girl's outfit? His sister looks like she shops at a thrift store. Which, let's be honest, she probably does. I froze, paper plates clutched in my hands. No, I'm serious. The house smells like farm animals. The bathroom has this weird stain on the ceiling. And James's mother keeps trying to give me these family recipes like I am ever going to cook. As if, she laughed, this tinkling musical sound that made my blood turn to ice. I'm playing the long game here. James's IQ is off the charts, and Daddy says his firm is already talking about making him junior partner. Once he's fully established and earning serious money, we can quietly distance ourselves from all this. She must have gestured at our house, our life, everything we were. In the meantime, I smile and nod and pretend I think their little farm is charming. Something inside me cracked. I walked around the corner. Victoria was facing away from me, still talking, completely unaware. Hey, Victoria, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. She spun around, her eyes widening. For a split second, I saw something like fear cross her face. Then that perfect mask slammed back into place. Alana, I didn't see you there. I was just talking about how you're reusing my brother for his money and potential while mocking my family behind our backs. I finished. Yeah, I heard. Her mouth opened, closed. She looked like a beautiful fish gasping for air. That's not you misunderstood. I recorded it, I lied. I hadn't, but I needed to see her reaction. Try me. We stood there, locked in a silent battle. Then Victoria's expression changed. The fake sweetness evaporated, replaced by something cold and calculating. You think James will believe you over me? She asked softly. You think anyone will? You a jealous little girl who couldn't handle that her brother has moved on to bigger and better things. If you try to cause problems, I'll make sure James never speaks to you again. I will tell him you trying to sabotage his happiness because you couldn't stand to see him succeed. He'd never believe that, wouldn't he? She smiled, cruel and confident. He's already pulling away from this place. From these people. From you. It's only a matter of time before he sees what I've seen all along, that Millbrook is a dead end and his family is holding him back. She leaned closer, her perfume expensive, cloying, making my eyes water. You're nothing, Elena. A country mouse playing dress-up. Even if you told him what you heard, even if he believed you, do you really think he'd choose you over everything I can offer him? My family's connections, my social circle, the life we're building together? She pulled out her phone, tapped something, and showed me the screen. It was an Instagram post, James and Victoria at some glamorous rooftop party, surrounded by people in designer clothes, the city skyline glittering behind them. The caption read, "So grateful for this incredible life." Hashtag blessed, hashtag new beginnings, hashtag leaving the past behind. The post had 3,000 likes. He's already chosen, Victoria said simply. You just haven't accepted it yet. She walked past me, back toward the barbecue, her heels clicking against the stone path. I stood there, shaking, hating myself for not having actually recorded her, hating her for being right, hating the situation for being so impossibly complicated. I didn't tell James that day, or the next day, or ever. Because a terrible, annoying part of me suspected Victoria was right. James was changing. The farm, our parents, our simple life, they were becoming embarrassing to him. Maybe he hadn't articulated it yet, maybe he hadn't fully admitted it to himself, but it was there in the way he flinched. When Dad told his corny jokes and the way he steered conversations away from anything related to Millbrook when his new friends called. If I forced him to choose, I might lose him entirely, so I stayed silent. And I watched my brother slip away, month by month, year by year, until the person I'd idolized became someone I barely recognized. I threw myself into school after that. If James was going to abandon us for the city and its promises, then I'd show Victoria, show everyone that country girls could succeed too. I graduated valedictorian. I got scholarships to 3 universities. I chose the one farthest from Millbrook, a decision that broke my parents' hearts, but felt necessary for my survival. You'll do great things, sweetheart, Mom said as she helped me pack for college, tears streaming down her weathered face. You've always been special, just different from James, I said quietly. No, she grabbed my hands, forcing me to look at her. You're strong in ways he isn't. You don't forget where you come from. I wanted to believe her. College was brutal. Not academically. I'd always been good at school, but socially. I was surrounded by people like Victoria, people for whom money was as natural as breathing, people who summered in Europe and wintered in Aspen and spoke casually about their third homes. I had nothing. I worked 3 part-time jobs to cover what my scholarships didn't. I wore the same 5 outfits in rotation. I couldn't afford to go out with classmates, couldn't join their weekend trips, couldn't even buy the textbooks everyone else ordered without thinking twice. But I was determined. I studied business and hospitality management because I realized something during Victoria's visit. There was power in creating spaces, in controlling environments, in understanding what people wanted before they knew they wanted it. If Victoria could manipulate social situations to her advantage, then I could learn to manipulate entire experiences. How to read people. The tiny tells that showed whether a guest was actually angry or just needed to be heard. The difference between someone looking for luxury and someone looking for comfort. The art of making people feel special even when everything was going wrong. I was good at it. Really good. By my junior year, I was assistant managing a boutique hotel near campus. By my senior year, the owner, a kind older woman named Margaret, had taken me under her wing. You have something special, Elena, she told me one night as we closed up after a particularly chaotic wedding. You see people. Really see them. That's rare. Margaret introduced me to her network hotel owners, investors, real estate developers. I soaked up everything like a sponge, learning about property acquisition, renovation financing, market analysis, guest experience optimization. When I graduated, Margaret offered me a job managing one of her properties full-time. The salary was decent, but more importantly, she promised to teach me the business from the inside out. I accepted immediately. For the next 3 years, I worked like I was possessed. I learned every aspect of hotel operations, accounting, marketing, staff management, vendor negotiations. I saved every penny, living in a studio apartment that made my college dorm look spacious, eating ramen more nights than I care to remember. My parents called regularly, asking when I'd visit. Soon, I always said. Work is crazy right now. The truth was, I couldn't face Millbrook. Couldn't face the reminders of James, of who we used to be, of the family we were supposed to have but didn't anymore. James rarely called. When we did talk, our conversations were stilted, full of awkward pauses and surface-level updates. How's Victoria? I'd ask, forcing brightness into my voice. Great. She's working at her father's company now. We're thinking about getting engaged soon. Each time he said it, something inside me hardened a little more. Then, 5 years after college, everything changed. Margaret got sick. Cancer, aggressive and unforgiving. Within 6 months, she was gone. And she'd left me something in her will. Enough money to make a down payment on a property of my own. Buy something special, her note said. Build something that matters. Show the world what you're capable of. I cried for 3 days straight. Then I started looking for properties. That's when I found the Grand Riverside Hotel. It was a disaster. A once gorgeous Victorian building in the heart of the city that had been abandoned for years. Its windows boarded up, its ornate facade crumbling, its interior gutted by water damage and neglect. Everyone said I was insane to consider it. The building was in a historic district, which meant renovations would require dozens of permits and approvals. The neighborhood was sketchy. The costs would be astronomical. But when I walked through that ruined lobby, stepping over debris and breathing in air thick with dust and mold, I saw something else. I saw potential. I saw marble floors waiting to shine again. I saw that magnificent central staircase, still intact beneath years of grime. I saw the original crown molding, the hand-carved banisters, the bones of something truly spectacular. I bought it with Margaret's money and every loan I could secure. Then I worked. For 3 years, I lived in a construction site, wearing hard hats and work boots more often than dresses and heels. I argued with contractors, wooed inspectors, charmed historical society board members, who initially wanted to tear the building down. I learned plumbing and electrical work. I tiled bathrooms at 2 a.m. because we couldn't afford to hire enough workers. I painted walls until my arms screamed. I planted every flower in the garden myself, on my hands and knees in the dirt, remembering the farm and everything Victoria had mocked me for. Slowly, impossibly, the Grand Riverside came back to life. I designed it to be a contradiction: historic elegance meets modern luxury, classical architecture, housing cutting-edge technology, traditional service with contemporary sensibilities. The grand opening was modest. I couldn't afford a big party or celebrity guests. Just some local press, a handful of early bookings, and me standing in that lobby, tears streaming down my face as I looked at what I'd built. But word spread. People loved the Grand Riverside. They loved the attention to detail, the way the hotel felt both timeless and current, the service that made them feel like family rather than transactions. Within a year, we were booked solid. Within 2 years, we were hosting some of the city's most prestigious events. Within 3 years, I was expanding, acquiring 2 more historic properties and renovating them with the same obsessive care I'd given the Grand Riverside. I was 29 years old, and I owned 3 of the city's most successful boutique hotels. I hadn't told my parents the extent of my success. When they asked about work, I kept it vague. The hotel business is good, I'd say. I'm managing a nice property downtown. I hadn't told James at all. We'd barely spoken in years. He was busy with his consulting career, climbing that corporate ladder, living his life with Victoria. I told myself I didn't care, that I'd moved on, that I'd built this empire to prove something to myself, not to them. I was lying, of course. Every time I closed a deal, I imagined Victoria's face. Every time I walked through my lobby in a designer dress I'd finally been able to afford, I thought about her calling me a country mouse. Every time someone important praised my hotels, I wished James could see it. But I stayed silent, building my empire in the shadows, waiting for what? I didn't know. Until 3 months ago, when my assistant brought me a booking request. "Ms. Hayes, we have an inquiry for the grand ballroom," she said, holding a tablet. "It's for an engagement party. The client is willing to pay premium rates for exclusive use of the space." "What's the name?" I asked absently, reviewing financial reports. "Ashford, Victoria Ashford." The pen I was holding clattered to my desk. "What? Victoria Ashford? She's marrying a James Hayes? Is that coincidence? Same last name as you?" I stared at my assistant, my mind racing. James and Victoria were getting engaged. And Victoria had chosen my hotel for the party, having no idea who owned it. The irony was so perfect it hurt. "Book it," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "Give them whatever they want. I'll handle this one personally." My assistant looked surprised. I rarely handled individual events anymore. but nodded and left. I sat alone in my office, staring at the booking request on my screen. Victoria Ashford. The woman who'd called me a stinky country girl. The woman who'd mocked my family, my home, my life. The woman who'd used my brother as a stepping stone to the life she wanted. She was coming to my hotel. And she had no idea. For the first time in years, I smiled. A real smile, sharp and predatory and full of dark promise. If Victoria wanted a party at the Grand Riverside, I'd give her one. A party no one would ever forget. I spent the next week planning. First, I did research. I hired a private investigator, discreet, expensive, thorough. I wanted to know everything about Victoria's life, her family, her social circle. If I was going to do this, I needed to do it right. What he uncovered was illuminating. Victoria's father, Richard Ashford, ran Ashford Properties, one of the largest real estate development companies in the city. On the surface, everything looked legitimate: high-end commercial buildings, luxury condos, the kind of projects that won awards and graced magazine covers. But dig deeper, and cracks appeared. Ashford Properties had been investigated twice for building code violations that resulted in unsafe conditions. They'd been sued by multiple contractors for non-payment. There were rumors, unconfirmed but persistent, of bribery, of inspectors looking the other way, of corners cut in the name of profit. Richard Ashford was, essentially, a barely legal slumlord with a good PR team. Victoria herself was no better. She'd spent the past decade working for her father's company in public relations, which seemed to mean attending charity galas, posting Instagram photos, and occasionally showing up at ribbon-cutting ceremonies. Her social media was a masterclass in performance, endless posts about gratitude and blessed lives and giving back, while the comments were full of sycophants praising her grace and generosity. But there were other things too. Deleted tweets that my investigator had managed to recover, showing Victoria making cruel comments about people she deemed beneath her. Screenshots of group chats where she and her friends mocked poor people and social climbers who tried to enter their circles. She was exactly who I remembered. She'd just gotten better at hiding it. James, meanwhile, had thrived professionally. He was now a senior partner at his consulting firm, specializing in corporate restructuring. From what I could tell, he was genuinely good at his job, brilliant, actually, with a reputation for turning failing companies around. But his social media was telling too. Every photo, every post was about his life with Victoria. Their vacations to Bali and Monaco. Their friends' destination weddings. Their attendance at gallery openings and opera performances. There was nothing about Millbrook. Nothing about our parents. One single photo from 2 years ago showing him at the farm standing stiffly next to Dad, both of them looking uncomfortable. The caption reading simply, "Visiting family. Not home. Not where I grew up. Just visiting family. Like tourists stopping at a historical site." I stared at that photo for a long time, feeling something cold and final settle in my chest. He'd made his choice. He'd chosen Victoria's world over ours, her values over the ones we'd been raised with. Maybe she'd manipulated him into it. Maybe he'd been willing all along. It didn't matter anymore. When my investigator presented his full report, I sat in my office and read every page, absorbing the details, planning my approach. Victoria thought she was coming to a hotel for her engagement party. She thought she was celebrating the culmination of her long-term plan, marrying a brilliant, successful man from humble origins who'd proven himself worthy of her world. She had no idea she was walking into mine. I became involved in every detail of the engagement party planning. Victoria wanted elegance. She wanted luxury. She wanted an event that would be Instagram perfect, that would make her friends jealous, that would cement her position as someone who had achieved everything she'd always deserved. I was happy to oblige. My events coordinator, a sharp woman named Diana, initially handled the communications. Victoria was demanding changing her mind about floral arrangements 3 times, insisting the champagne be a specific vintage that cost $400 per bottle, requiring that every linens be hand-pressed within hours of the event. "She's exhausting," Diana said after one particularly trying conference call. "I've worked with Brazillas before, but this woman takes it to another level. I'll take over from here," I told her. Diana looked relieved. I scheduled a meeting with Victoria to finalize details. She arrived at my office in a cloud of expensive perfume, wearing a dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. I dressed carefully for this moment, a tailored suit that screamed success without being flashy. Subtle jewelry, my hair pulled back in a sleek bun. I looked like a professional. Like someone who belonged in this world. Like someone very different from the 17-year-old in hand-me-down jeans Victoria had last seen. "Miss Ashford," I said, extending my hand as she entered. "I'm Elena Hayes, owner of the Grand Riverside. I wanted to personally ensure your engagement party is everything you've dreamed of." Victoria's handshake was brief, perfunctory. She was already looking around my office, assessing, judging. "It's nice," she said, in a tone that suggested it wasn't quite nice enough. "I've heard good things about this hotel. Some of my friends had events here. We pride ourselves on excellence," I said smoothly, gesturing for her to sit. "Now, let's go over your vision for the evening." For the next hour, I let Victoria talk. She described her ideal party in excessive detail. The color scheme, blush and gold. The flowers, peonies, lots of peonies. The menu, a 7-course tasting menu that accommodated every possible dietary restriction. The music, a string quartet for cocktail hour, DJ for dancing later. "And the guest list?" I asked. 200 people, Victoria said. "The cream of the city's social scene. My father's business associates, James's colleagues, are friends. This needs to be perfect, Ms. Hayes. This is my engagement party, but it's also a statement. Do you understand?" "Completely," I said. And I did. This was Victoria's victory lap, her public declaration that she'd achieved everything she set out to achieve. She had no idea she was planning her own execution. Now, Victoria continued, pulling out her phone. "I have very specific requirements for the timeline. I want guests arriving at 7 p.m. sharp. Cocktail hour in the lobby. That staircase of yours will be perfect for photos. Dinner at 8:30 in the ballroom. James will give a speech at 9:45. I'll give mine at 10 o'clock, then dancing until midnight." I took notes, nodding along. "And security?" I asked. "With this many important guests, you'll want to ensure privacy." "Yes," Victoria's eyes lit up. "Absolutely. No uninvited guests, no press unless I personally approve them. This is an intimate celebration." "Of course, we'll have security at every entrance. No one gets in without being on the list." Victoria looked pleased. "Perfect. You know, Miss Hayes, I had my doubts about using a smaller venue like this. My mother wanted us to use the Metropolitan, but I thought this place had a certain charm. More exclusive, you know? Not everyone can book it." The irony of Victoria Ashford talking about exclusivity in a hotel I built from rubble was almost too much. "We're honored to host your celebration," I said, my smile never wavering. We went over more details. She wanted specific lighting, certain wines, particular linens. With each request, I agreed enthusiastically, making notes, assuring her everything would be exactly as she envisioned. "Oh, one more thing," Victoria said as she stood to leave. "James's family will be attending. They single quotes read ... Well, they're from a very rural background. Simple people. I trust your staff knows how to handle all types of guests." My hand tightened on my pen. "We treat all guests with respect and dignity, Miss Ashford." Of course, I just mean, they might be overwhelmed by all this." She gestured vaguely at my office, at the luxury surrounding us. "James's parents have never been to anything like this. His sister couldn't even be bothered to stay in touch with him, so she probably won't even show up. But if she does, I trust your staff won't let her embarrass anyone." I kept my expression neutral. "Your guests will all feel welcome here." "Wonderful." Victoria extended her hand again. "I'm so glad we're using the Grand Riverside, Miss Hayes. I have a feeling this party will be talked about for years." "I guarantee it," I said. She left in a swirl of perfume and entitlement, completely unaware that she just confirmed every cruel thing I remembered about her. After she was gone, I sat in my office, hands shaking slightly. She'd referred to our parents as simple people. She dismissed me as someone who
couldn't be bothered to stay in touch with James.
Rewriting history to make herself the victim of my supposed neglect. She'd worried about me embarrassing her. The audacity was breathtaking. I picked up my phone and called my head of security, a former police detective named Robert, who'd worked for me since the Grand Riverside opened. Robert, I need you for the Ashford engagement party in 3 weeks. The big one? Sure thing, boss. What are we looking at? 200 guests, high profile, exclusive. I'll send you the details. But Robert... I need something special for this one. I need cameras everywhere, and I mean everywhere. Every angle, every conversation, high quality audio. Can you do that? There was a pause. That's a lot of surveillance for a regular party. Are you expecting trouble? I'm expecting truth, I said. And I want to capture every second of it. You got it? Anything else? I thought about Victoria's requirement for security at every entrance, her insistence on an exclusive, intimate celebration.
Yes. I want you to personally manage the guest list at the door.
No one gets in unless they're on the approved list, no exceptions. I'll send it to you directly. Understood. After hanging up, I sat back in my chair and looked out my window at the city skyline. The same skyline James and Victoria had posed in front of for that Instagram post years ago. 3 weeks until the party.
3 weeks to perfect every detail. 3 weeks until Victoria Ashford learned that country girls don't forget. And we definitely don't forgive.
The night before the engagement party, I didn't sleep. I walked through the Grand Riverside's empty ballroom at 2 a.m., checking every detail. The florists had done their work perfectly. Thousands of pale pink peonies arranged in cascading centerpieces, exactly as Victoria had specified. The tables were set with gold-rimmed china and crystal glasses that caught the light from the chandeliers I'd spent months restoring. It was beautiful. Objectively, stunningly beautiful. And tomorrow night, it would be the stage for Victoria's destruction. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. Are you sure you want to do this, sweetheart? It's not too late to just let it go.
I told my parents everything 2 weeks ago.
Driven home to Millbrook, my first visit in almost a year, and sat them down in the living room where Victoria had once mocked us. James is getting engaged, I'd said, to Victoria Ashford. And they're having the party at my hotel. Mom had gone pale. Dad had set down his coffee cup with a shaking hand. Elena, Mom started. You don't have to. I want you there, I interrupted. Both of you. I want James to see what he left behind. And I want Victoria to face what she tried to bury. This will hurt James, Dad said quietly. It was the most he'd spoken in one sitting in months. James is already hurt, I replied. He just doesn't know it yet.
She's using him, Dad. She's always been using him.
And if we don't show him who she really is, he'll spend his whole life with someone who despises where he came from. We'd argued about it for hours. Mom worried about family fractures that might never heal. Dad worried about humiliating James publicly. I listened to all of it, understanding their fears, but refusing to back down. She called me a stinky country girl, I finally said, my voice breaking. She mocked our home, our life, everything we are. She spent a decade making James ashamed of you. Of us, and in 3 weeks, going to stand in a hotel I built from nothing and celebrate trapping him in a life built on lies.
Mom had started crying then. You really built all this?
The hotels? Everything?
Brick, I said. Every tile.
Every single piece. And I did it so I'd never have to feel small again. Dad stood up, walked over to me, and pulled me into a hug, the first real embrace we'd shared in years. We'll be there, he said gruffly. Your mother will need a new dress. I'll buy her one, I said. I'll buy you both anything you want. We don't want anything, Mom said, wiping her eyes. We just want our family back. Then help me get it back, I replied. Now, standing in the ballroom at 2 a.m., I reread Mom's text. Are you sure you want to do this?
I thought about James teaching me to fish, promising to come back for me, swearing we'd always be a team. I thought about Victoria's sneer, her cruel laugh, her absolute certainty that she could erase my family like we were a mistake to be corrected.
I typed back. I've never been more sure of anything. The response came quickly. Then we'll be there. We love you, Elena. No matter what happens. I slipped my phone into my pocket and walked to the ballroom's main entrance. Tomorrow night, Victoria would make her grand entrance down that central staircase.
The one I'd painstakingly restored. The one that appeared in every Instagram post about the Grand Riverside.
She'd descend those stairs thinking she was the star of her own fairy tale. She had no idea she was walking into a trap. The day of the engagement party arrived with perfect weather, unseasonably warm for October, the kind of evening that made the city feel magical. I arrived at the Grand Riverside at 4 p.m., 3 hours before guests were scheduled to arrive.
My staff was already in position, everyone briefed on their roles.
Diana had the catering team running through final checks. Robert was testing the security cameras one last time. I'd chosen my outfit carefully. A deep emerald dress that was elegant without being flashy, expensive without screaming wealth, sophisticated without trying too hard. My hair was styled in loose waves, my makeup natural but polished. I looked like someone who belonged in this world but hadn't been consumed by it.
I looked like myself.
At 6:30 p.m., my parents arrived. I met them at a side entrance, away from the main guest area. Mom looked beautiful in the navy dress I'd bought her, her gray hair styled professionally for the first time I could remember. Dad wore a suit that actually fit him properly, looking uncomfortable but determined. "You both look wonderful," I said, hugging them. "Elena." Mom gripped my arms, searching my face. "Is James here yet?" "Not yet. He and Victoria will arrive at 7:15, fashionably late to their own party." That's what Victoria wanted. "What's the plan?" Dad asked. I'd explained it to them over the phone, but I went through it again now. "You'll be seated at table 7, mixed with some of Victoria's parents' business associates.
I've made sure you're near the center of the room.
When the speeches start, I'll be ready. And then?" Mom's voice shook. "And then everyone learns the truth." At exactly 7 p.m., guests began arriving.
I positioned myself strategically visible but not prominent, greeting guests as they entered but letting my staff handle the details. I watched as the city's elite flowed into my hotel. These people who wielded power and influence like weapons, completely unaware that tonight they were pawns in a much larger game.
Victoria's parents arrived at 7:05.
Richard Ashford was exactly as I'd imagined, tall.
Silver-haired, expensive suit.
The kind of handshake that was calculated to intimidate.
His wife, Patricia, was a preserved version of what Victoria would become, surgically enhanced, draped in diamonds, smile frozen in place. They swept past me without a second glance, heading straight for the champagne.
At 7:15, Victoria and James arrived.
I was standing near the lobby's entrance when I saw them.
James first, looking handsome in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, his hair styled just so, his smile confident and bright.
"My brother, unrecognizable, and beside him, Victoria."
She wore a champagne-colored dress that probably cost more than a car, her hair in an elaborate updo, diamonds glittering at her throat and ears. She looked like a queen surveying her kingdom, her hand possessively on James's arm.
They paused at the entrance, knowing everyone would turn to look, and everyone did. There was a moment of perfect silence as 200 guests took in the couple of the hour. Then applause, cheers, people rushing forward to congratulate them. I hung back, watching.
James was beaming, accepting congratulations, shaking hands, playing the part of the successful man who'd found his perfect match. Victoria was radiant, soaking in the attention,
periodically posing for photos with guests, her laugh echoing through the lobby. Then she saw my parents. I watched it happen. Mom and Dad had entered through the main doors just after James and Victoria, slightly lost in the crowd of wealthy strangers.
They were looking around, clearly overwhelmed, when Victoria's gaze landed on them. Her smile didn't falter. Years of practice had taught her how to maintain appearances.
But I saw the flash in her eyes, surprise, annoyance, calculation.
She leaned close to James, whispering something.
He looked in my parents' direction, and his expression changed. Surprise, yes, but also something else. Discomfort? Embarrassment?
My chest tightened. James moved toward them, Victoria still attached to his arm. "Mom, Dad!" James hugged them, but it was brief, perfunctory. "I didn't think you'd make it." Of course we made it, Dad said gruffly. It's your engagement party. Yes, well. James glanced around, clearly aware of the eyes on them. I'm glad you're here. You remember Victoria. How could we forget, Mom said, her voice cooler than I'd ever heard it.
Victoria's smile was blinding. Mr. and Mrs. Hayes!
How wonderful to see you again.
James told me you might not be able to make it something about the farm needing attention.
We made time, Mom replied evenly.
There was an awkward pause. James looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Victoria maintained her gracious hostess expression, but her hand on James's arm had tightened, nails digging into expensive fabric.
Well, Victoria said brightly, you must be so overwhelmed by all this.
This hotel is quite something, isn't it? So much more elegant than ... double quotes. She trailed off delicately, leaving the comparison unspoken but clear. Than what you're used to, than your world, than anything you could provide.
It is beautiful, Mom agreed.
The owner must be very talented. Oh yes. Victoria waved a dismissive hand. Some young woman, I believe. She's been very accommodating. Now let me introduce you to some people. She was already steering James away, ready to separate him from his parents as quickly as possible, to minimize any potential embarrassment. That's when I stepped forward.
Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, I said warmly, loudly enough that nearby guests turned to look. I'm so glad you could make it. James froze. His head whipped around, eyes widening as he took me in. Elena? His voice cracked on my name. Victoria's perfectly composed expression finally cracked. Just for a second, just a flash shock, recognition, fear before the mask slammed back in place. But I'd seen it. And it was glorious. Hello, James, I said, my smile serene. Hello, Victoria. Welcome to the Grand Riverside Hotel. James stared at me like I was a ghost. What are you ... You're here.
How? I own it, I said simply. This is my hotel.
Has been for 3 years now. The silence that followed was delicious.
Victoria's mouth open, closed. She looked between me and the opulent lobby around us, calculations running behind her eyes. James looked like he'd been struck. You ... What? You own this?
Every brick, I said,
echoing what I'd told our parents.
I built this from ruins. Well, renovated it, technically. But it was quite the project. Other guests were starting to pay attention now, sensing drama. Elena. James took a step toward me, his expression complicated.
I had no idea you were even in the city.
You never said ... You never asked, I replied gently.
It's been years since we've really talked, hasn't it?
Victoria had recovered her composure.
Well, what a surprise. Her laugh was like broken glass. James's little sister, all grown up and running a hotel. How ... Industrious. The way she said industrious made it sound like cute. I prefer successful, I said, my smile sharp.
But we can use whichever word you're comfortable with. James was still processing.
Elena, why didn't you tell me about this? About any of this?
Why didn't you tell me you were getting engaged? I countered. He flinched.
I was going to, I just ...
Things have been busy.
Of course they have. I turned to Victoria, who was watching me like I was a bomb that might explode.
Your party is all set, by the way. Everything exactly as you requested. The blush peonies, the vintage champagne, the 7-course meal. It's going to be a night no one forgets. I'm sure it will be. Lovely, Victoria said, her voice strained.
Oh, it will be much more than lovely, I promised.
Shall we get started? Your guests are waiting. I gestured toward the ballroom, where the string quartet had started playing.
Victoria looked like she wanted to say something, probably to demand I explain what the hell was going on. How the stinky country girl she dismissed had ended up owning one of the city's premier hotels.
But we were surrounded by her guests, her friends, her entire social circle. She couldn't make a scene without undermining the carefully cultivated image she'd spent a decade building. So she did what she'd always done. She smiled, adjusted her mask, and pretended everything was exactly as she'd planned.
Of course, she said graciously.
Come, James. Let's greet our guests. She pulled him toward the ballroom, But James kept looking back at me, his expression full of questions I wasn't ready to answer. Not yet. Mom and Dad approached me once they were gone. That was quite an entrance, Dad said dryly. That was nothing, I replied, watching Victoria and James disappear into the crowd. The real show hasn't even started yet. The cocktail hour proceeded exactly as Victoria had planned on the surface.
At least. Guests mingled in the lobby, champagne flowing freely, the string quartet playing classical pieces that provided elegant background noise.
People posed on the grand staircase for photos, their phones capturing every angle of the restored Victorian architecture I'd spent years perfecting. I moved through the crowd like a ghost, observing but not participating. My staff knew not to introduce me as the owner unless specifically asked. I wanted to watch, to see how Victoria operated in her natural habitat, surrounded by people who reinforced her sense of superiority. What I saw was masterful in a cruel sort of way. Victoria worked the room like a politician, touching arms, laughing at jokes, making each person feel like they were the most important guest there. She introduced James constantly. My brilliant fiancé, the genius who saved Whitmore Industries, the man who surprised everyone. That last phrase made my stomach turn. The man who surprised everyone meant the man who'd risen above his humble origins, who'd proven himself worthy despite his unfortunate background. James, for his part, seemed to be playing his role perfectly. He shook hands with confidence, discussed market trends and corporate strategy, laughed at the right moments. He looked like he belonged here, like this world of designer suits and 7-course meals was where he'd always been meant to be. Only occasionally did I catch something else in his expression, a flicker of discomfort when someone made a joke about old money versus new money, a tightness around his eyes when Victoria's father clapped him on the back and said something about smart investments. And every so often I'd catch him scanning the crowd, and I knew he was looking for me. My parents sat at their assigned table, painfully out of place among Victoria's father's business associates. I watched a woman in a dress that cost more than our childhood home drape herself across from my mother and ask, in a voice dripping with false interest, "So what do you do?" Mom straightened her shoulders.
We run a dairy farm. 60 acres in Millbrook. Oh, how rustic. The woman's laugh was like wind chimes in a storm.
I've always thought farm life must be so simple, so peaceful. No stress at all. Dad's jaw tightened, but Mom just smiled. It's honest work. We're proud of it.
Of course.
And your son is so impressive, rising above all that. You must be very proud of how far he's come. Rising above. As if our life was something to escape from, something to be ashamed of. I wanted to intervene, to tell this woman that the lobster she was eating came from honest fishermen who worked harder in a day than she worked in her life. That the marble beneath her feet had been laid by immigrant workers who earned in a month what she spent on shoes. But I held back. Not yet. Everything had to happen in the right order. At 8:30, exactly as scheduled, the ballroom doors opened and Diana announced dinner. The ballroom transformation was breathtaking. ID designed it to showcase the room's historic bones while feeling thoroughly modern, the original tin ceiling restored, and lit to glow like hammered gold. The tall windows draped in silk that caught the candlelight. The tables arranged in a pattern that maximized the space while maintaining intimacy. Guests gasped as they entered. I heard Victoria accept compliments graciously, as if she'd personally designed everything rather than simply demanding it exist. James caught my eye across the room. He was seated at the head table with Victoria, her parents, and several of their closest friends. He looked like he wanted to come over to talk to me, but Victoria's hand on his arm kept him anchored in place. I deliberately seated myself at a table near the back close enough to see everything but far enough away to avoid immediate attention. Robert stood nearby, practically invisible in his dark suit, but I knew he was monitoring every camera feed, recording every conversation. The first course arrived oysters on ice, garnished with mignonette and lemon. I watched as waiters moved efficiently through the room, the result of weeks of training. At the head table, Victoria was holding court, her voice carrying across the room as she told a story about their engagement. James took me to this darling little island, completely private of course. He'd arranged for the entire resort staff to set up this elaborate dinner on the beach. When the sun set,
He got down on one knee and said ... double quotes. She continued, painting a picture of romantic perfection.
James smiled along, but I noticed he wasn't actually saying anything, just nodding at the appropriate moments. The courses continued. Butternut squash soup, seared scallops, Wagyu beef that melted on the tongue. With each course, the wine flowed more freely, tongues loosened, laughter grew louder. And with each course I waited. At table 7,
I watched my parents navigate their way through dining etiquette they'd probably never encountered before. Mom held her silverware correctly. She'd always been meticulous about table manners,
insisting James and I learn them even though we ate most meals at a worn kitchen table. Dad was quieter, methodical,
clearly uncomfortable but refusing to show it.
The woman who'd condescended to them earlier was now very drunk, gesticulating wildly as she told a story about her recent trip to St. Tropez. The yacht was so big, we literally got lost trying to find the master suite. She cackled, then turned to my mother. Have you ever been on a yacht, Mrs. Hayes? Can't say I have, Mom replied evenly. Oh, you simply must. Though I suppose ... double quotes, the woman waved vaguely. Different worlds, aren't they? I saw Dad's hand clench into a fist under the table. That's when the man next to him, one of Richard Ashford's business partners, leaned over and said, loud enough for half the table to hear, I have to say, it's quite impressive what your son has accomplished. Really pulled himself up from nothing.
Victoria's father was just saying the other day how remarkable it is when someone from a
humble background manages to succeed in our circles. The implication was clear. James was an exception. An anomaly.
Dad stood up abruptly.
Excuse me, he said, his voice tight. I need some air. He walked out of the ballroom with the careful control of a man trying not to cause a scene. Mom watched him go, her expression anguished.
Then she looked directly at me across the room.
I gave her a small nod. Soon.
The dessert course arrived, individual pavlovas decorated with gold leaf, because of course Victoria wanted gold leaf.
As guests attacked their desserts with tipsy enthusiasm,
Victoria stood up, tapping her champagne flute with a fork.
The room quieted. Thank you all so much for being here tonight, Victoria began, her voice warm and practiced. James and I are overwhelmed by your love and support.
When I think about our journey together, how we met at Preston, how I knew immediately he was special, how proud I am of everything he's become, I just feel so incredibly blessed.
She reached down and took James's hand, pulling him to his feet beside her. James came into my life at exactly the right moment, she continued. He was this brilliant, ambitious man who'd worked so hard to get where he was.
And I like to think I helped him see his full potential, helped him understand that his past didn't have to define his future. There it was. Subtle, but clear. His past didn't have to define his future.
Translation. I helped him escape where he came from. James shifted uncomfortably beside her. So thank you, Victoria concluded, for celebrating with us tonight. Thank you for being part of our story.
And thank you for accepting us into your homes, your businesses, your lives.
It means everything. Applause erupted. Victoria beamed, soaking it in. James gave a small wave, then said, I'd like to add something if I may. Victoria's smile froze for just a fraction of a second before recovering. This wasn't part of the planned program. Of course, darling, she said, sitting down with a gracious gesture.
James remained standing, looking out at the crowd.
His eyes found mine in the back of the room, held for a long moment. I want to thank Victoria for those beautiful words, he began.
And I want to thank all of you for coming tonight. This venue is ... double quotes. He paused, looking around the ballroom. It's incredible.
When Victoria told me she'd booked the Grand Riverside, I didn't realize what that meant. I didn't know this place existed. He turned, looking directly at me now.
I definitely didn't know my sister owned it.
A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. People started whispering, looking around, trying to figure out who he was talking about. Elena? James called out. Would you come up here? My heart was pounding, but I stood smoothly, my expression calm. As I walked toward the head table, I could feel 200 pairs of eyes tracking my movement. I heard the whispers intensifying. That's his sister? She owns this place? I thought she was just staff. Victoria's expression was a masterpiece of controlled panic. I reached the head table and stood beside James, facing the crowd. This is my sister, Elena Hayes, James announced.
We grew up together on our parents' farm in Millbrook. And apparently, while I was busy climbing the corporate ladder, she was building an empire. He turned to me, his expression complicated. I'm sorry I didn't know. I'm sorry we lost touch.
I'm sorry for a lot of things. The sincerity in his voice almost broke me. Almost. But I couldn't let sentiment derail what needed to happen. Thank you, James, I said, my voice steady. I'm happy you're happy. That's all I've ever wanted for you. I started to step back, to return to my table, but James caught my arm. Wait, I need to ask you something. He glanced at Victoria, then back to me. Why did we lose touch?
Really? I've been thinking about it since I saw you earlier, and I realize I don't actually know.
One day we were close, and then we just weren't. This was not part of my plan.
I'd expected to control the timing, the revelation, everything.
But James had just thrown it all into chaos by putting me on the spot in front of everyone. Victoria stood up, her voice honey-sweet with an edge of steel. Darling, maybe this isn't the best time. No, James interrupted, never taking his eyes off me. I need to know. Elena, what happened? I looked at my brother, really looked at him.
He'd aged since I'd seen him last. There were lines around his eyes, a tension in his shoulders, something in his expression that looked like exhaustion wearing an expensive suit.
And I realized he already knew something was wrong. Maybe he didn't know what exactly. Maybe he'd convinced himself everything was fine. But somewhere deep down he knew. I could walk away. I could tell him we'd talk later. Keep the peace, avoid the public scene. Or I could tell the truth.
I thought about the 17-year-old girl who stood in a barn overhearing the front of me mock everything she was. I thought about my parents sitting in that ballroom, surrounded by people who treated them like curiosities. I thought about 10 years of silence and distance and pretending everything was okay when nothing was okay.
Do you remember Thanksgiving your junior year? I asked quietly. When you first brought Victoria home? James frowned. Of course. Do you remember the day after, when you went into town with Dad to pick up supplies? Victoria and I were alone at the house. I saw Victoria go pale. She knew what was coming. Elena, she said, her voice sharp. This is hardly. She told me then that she was using you, I said, cutting her off. She was on the phone with a friend, standing by her car. She said your family was provincial and embarrassing. She said she was playing the long game, waiting for you to establish yourself
and earn serious money so you could distance yourselves from all this. The room was dead silent. James stared at me. What?
She called me a country mouse. She said even if I told you what I'd heard, you'd never believe me over her.
She said you were already pulling away from Millbrook, from Mom and Dad, from me.
That you'd chosen her world over ours. That's Victoria started. And she was right. I continued, my voice stronger now. You did pull away. You stopped coming home. You stopped calling. You became embarrassed by where you came from, who you were. And I let you go because I thought maybe she was right.
Maybe you were better off without us holding you back. James looked like I'd struck him. I didn't mean ... double quotes. But I was wrong, I said, turning to face Victoria fully now.
You weren't better off. You were just lost. And she knew exactly how to keep you lost. Victoria's mask had completely shattered. Her face was twisted with rage and panic. You bitter little, this is my engagement party. How dare you try to ruin this with your pathetic jealousy? Jealous? I almost laughed. Of what? Your fake life. Your manipulated relationship? The way you've spent a decade isolating my brother from everyone who actually loves him. I love James. Victoria shrieked. You love what he represents. I shot back. The brilliant man from nothing who proves your worldview that people like you are naturally superior, but occasionally someone from humble backgrounds can be elevated into your circle if they're exceptional enough. He's your charity case, Victoria. Your pet project. Your way of feeling magnanimous while still looking down on everyone else. That's not true. But her voice wavered. James had gone very still beside me. Victoria, he said quietly. Tell me she's lying. Victoria turned to him, tears suddenly streaming down her perfectly made-up face.
James, baby. She's twisting everything. I love you. I've always loved you. She's just trying to... The Thanksgiving she's talking about, James interrupted. I do remember something. When we got back from town, you were upset.
You said Elena had been rude to you. You said she clearly resented our relationship and I should give her space to adjust.
That's when we started coming home less, isn't it?
Victoria's mouth opened, closed. You told me, James continued, his voice getting harder, that my family made you uncomfortable.
That they didn't understand our lifestyle. That it would be better if we built our life separately from them. And I believed you. I thought I was protecting you from judgment when really double quotes. He stopped, the realization washing over his face.
Really, you were protecting yourself from them seeing who you actually are. James, please. I want to hear it, he said.
I want to hear you tell me, in front of all these people, that you actually respect my family. That you're not embarrassed by where I come from. That you haven't spent years trying to erase my past like it was a stain on your perfect life. The ballroom was absolutely silent.
200 guests watched, champagne glasses forgotten, desserts untouched, as everything unraveled. Victoria looked around desperately, seeing her carefully constructed world crumbling. Her parents sat frozen at their table, her father's face red with fury, her mother's hand covering her mouth. Double quotes, Victoria started, then stopped.
She looked at James, and for a moment, I saw something almost like genuine emotion cross her face. Fear, maybe, or regret.
But then her expression hardened. You want the truth? She said coldly.
Fine. Yes, your family is embarrassing.
Yes, I've worked hard to distance us from them. Yes, I think people like them, people who are satisfied with small lives in small towns, are holding back people like you who actually have potential. Gasps rippled through the crowd. But I made you better, Victoria continued, her voice rising. When I met you, you were this smart kid with potential but no polish, no connections. No understanding of how the real world works. I introduced you to the right people. I taught you how to dress, how to talk, how to navigate social situations. I made you into someone who could succeed in this world. She gestured around the ballroom, at all the wealth and privilege on display. Without me, you'd still be that farm boy pretending to belong. You should be thanking me, James. We both should be thanking me. The silence that followed was devastating.
Then from across the room, a chair scraped back.
My father stood up. He walked slowly through the ballroom, every eye following him. He looked out of place in his off-the-rack suit, his weathered hands, his simple haircut. He looked exactly like what he was, a farmer who'd spent his life working honest land. He looked like the most dignified person in the room. He stopped in front of James and Victoria. Son, he said quietly, your mother and I came here tonight because we wanted to support you. Because even though you haven't been home in 3 years, even though you barely call, even though you've made it clear you're rebuilding a life that doesn't include us, we still love you. We will always love you. James's eyes were shining with unshed tears. But this woman, Dad continued, his gaze moving to Victoria, is not someone we can welcome into our family.
Not because she's wealthy or educated or sophisticated,
but because she's cruel. Because she looks down on people whose only crime is living differently than she does. Because she is trying to convince you that you need to be ashamed of the people who raised you. He turned back to James. Your sister built all this. He gestured around the ballroom, without forgetting where she came from. She worked harder than anyone I've ever known, made herself successful beyond anything I could have imagined. But she still calls us every week. She still knows the names of every cow on the farm. She still remembers that success doesn't mean erasing your past. It means honoring it while building your future. His voice cracked slightly. I won't tell you what to do, James. You're a grown man. But I will tell you this. If you marry this woman, you're choosing her values over ours. And I don't know if we can watch you do that. He turned and walked back to my mother,
who stood and took his hand. Together, they walked out of the ballroom with their heads high, leaving behind a room full of stunned silence, and my brother standing at the head table, his face white, his carefully constructed world in pieces around him. For a long moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then Victoria let out a sob, whether genuine or calculated. I couldn't tell, and ran from the ballroom, her heels clicking against marble until the sound faded into nothing. Several of her friends jumped up to follow her. Her mother, Patricia, stood and announced to no one in particular, "This is absolutely unconscionable."
Richard, we're leaving. But Richard Ashford wasn't looking at his wife.
He was looking at James with an expression I couldn't quite read. Anger, yes, but also something else. Calculation. Assessment. Like he was deciding whether his investment was still worth maintaining. That look told me everything I needed to know about the Ashford family values. James remained frozen at the head table, staring at the spot where our father had stood.
Around us, guests were whispering frantically, phones out, already spreading the news of the most dramatic engagement party the city had ever seen.
I touched James's arm gently. "We should talk," I said quietly. "Privately." He nodded numbly and let me guide him out of the ballroom, through a side door, and into my private office, the same office where I'd met with Victoria weeks ago to plan this disaster. I closed the door, muffling the chaos we'd left behind. James stood in the middle of the room, looking lost. He'd always been the confident one, the one with all the answers. Now he looked like a stranger wearing my brother's face. "I didn't know," he finally said. "About Victoria, about what she said to you, I didn't know." "Didn't you?" I asked, not unkindly. "Or did you just not want to know?" He flinched. "James, when was the last time you came home?"
And I mean really came home, not just stopping by for an obligatory holiday visit where you spent the whole time checking your phone and talking about work. He stopped.
"I don't know. 3 years," I said. "The last time you were home for more than a few hours was 3 years ago. For Dad's 60th birthday. You left early because Victoria had some gala she couldn't miss. I have responsibilities. We all have responsibilities." My voice rose despite my attempt to stay calm.
"I run 3 hotels, James. 3, I manage over 200 employees. I have board meetings and investor calls and operational crises that happen at 3 a.m., but I still call Mom every Sunday.
I still know that Buttercup's calf was born with a crooked leg and Dad spent weeks building her a special brace. I still remember where I came from. You're so much better than me, is that it?" James shot back, finally showing emotion. "You re the good daughter who stayed connected while I am the terrible son who abandoned the family." I stepped closer to him. "You re the brother I worshipped who let a manipulative woman convince you that loving your family and succeeding in your career were mutually exclusive.
You're the person who taught me to fish and promised you'd come back for me, and then forgot that promise existed.
You're the man who worked his ass off to build a successful career. And I'm proud of you for that. But somewhere along the way, you confused success with erasure." James sank into a chair, his head in his hands. "She told me they'd be hurt by our lifestyle," he said quietly. "Victoria. She said Mom and Dad would feel uncomfortable in our world, that it would be kinder to let them stay in theirs. She made it sound like I was protecting them." "From what?"
From seeing their son happy? From being proud of what you'd accomplished?
"From seeing how different I'd become." He looked up at me, and I was shocked to see tears on his face. "Elena, I don't fit there anymore. I haven't fit there in years. When I go home, I feel like I'm wearing a costume playing a part. I don't know how to talk about farms and cows and small-town gossip anymore. I tried for a while, but it just felt fake."
No. Oh. Fake. No.
"So instead you made yourself fake here?" I gestured at his expensive tux, his perfect hair, the persona he'd constructed.
You think this is more real?
These people, this world that Victoria represents, I don't know what's real anymore. His voice broke. I don't know who I am without the career and the suits and the life Victoria and I built. I don't know how to be the person Mom and Dad want me to be and the person my colleagues expect me to be.
So I chose one and tried to forget the other, and now I realize I chose wrong, but I don't know how to go back.
The vulnerability in his voice cracked something open in my chest.
This wasn't the confident, successful James I'd resented. This was my brother lost, confused, trapped in a life that looked perfect from the outside, but was hollow within. I sat down across from him.
You don't have to go back, I said softly.
You just have to stop running forward like your past is chasing you. James' mom and dad don't want you to be a farmer. They never expected you to come back to Millbrook and take over the dairy. They wanted you to be successful and happy.
Those aren't contradictory goals unless you make them contradictory.
But Victoria said.
Victoria lied, I interrupted.
About everything. She didn't want you to maintain relationships with mom and dad because she was afraid they'd see through her.
She isolated you deliberately because it gave her more control.
Every time you pulled away from us, you became more dependent on her and her world. James was quiet for a long moment.
That day you mentioned, he finally said.
Thanksgiving, my junior year. I remember now.
When Victoria and I left, she was weird in the car, agitated, kept looking at her phone. She told me you'd found her texts and read something out of context. She made it sound like you were the one being inappropriate, invading her privacy. And you believed her. I wanted to believe her. He looked at me helplessly.
I was in love, Elena, or I thought I was.
And she was this incredible woman who'd chosen me, this farm kid who didn't know what fork to use at fancy dinners, who said "you'll" unironically, who had to Google what summer meant as a verb. She made me feel like I was special.
Like I could be more than what I came from. You were always special, I said fiercely. You were brilliant and kind and funny. Victoria didn't make you those things. She just convinced you that those things weren't enough on their own. I've been such an idiot.
Yes, I agreed. But not irredeemably so. He almost smiled at that. What do I do now? He asked. Everything out there is destroyed. The engagement, my relationship with Victoria's family. Her father has major influence in my industry, Elena. This could kill my career. Is that what you're worried about?
I couldn't keep the disappointment from my voice. Your career?
No. I mean, yes, but... He ran his hands through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up. I don't know.
I just stood there while our father basically told me I've become someone he doesn't recognize. How do I come back from that?
You start by deciding who you actually want to be, I said. Not who Victoria wanted you to be.
Not who your colleagues expect you to be. Who James Hayes actually is. Stripped of all the pretense and performance. I don't know if I remember anymore. Then let me help you. Remember. I pulled out my phone and opened my photo gallery.
I'd been scrolling through old photos earlier that week in preparation for tonight. Now I showed James images I'd saved us as kids, fishing in Miller's Creek. James teaching me to drive the tractor. Our high school graduations. Mom and Dad standing in front of the farm, arms around each other, proud and weathered and real. That's who you come from, I said. Those are the people who shaped you, who loved you before you had a fancy degree or an impressive job title.
And they still love you, James. Even after everything,
they came here tonight because they love you.
James stared at the photos, his expression crumbling.
I called Mom 2 weeks ago, he said quietly, to tell her about the engagement. She asked if we'd be getting married at the farm, doing something simple. And I laughed.
I actually laughed and said something about how Victoria's parents would never go for that.
I heard Mom go quiet on the other end of the line, and I knew I'd hurt her.
But I didn't apologize. I just ...
Let it go. He looked up at me, tears streaming freely now. What have I become, Elena?
What kind of person treats his family like that?
The kind of person who got lost, I said gently.
But lost doesn't mean gone forever.
It just means you need to find your way back. There was a knock on the door. Diana poked her head in, her expression apologetic.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation in the ballroom. James and I exchanged glances. What kind of situation?
I asked. Victoria is back. She's making demands, threatening legal action over the party being sabotaged. Her father is backing her up, and things are getting heated. Of course they were. Let's go, I said. James grabbed my arm. Elena, thank you. For tonight. For telling me the truth. For everything. Thank you for listening, I replied. Now let's go deal with your ex-fiancé. Ex-fiancé, he repeated, like he was testing out the words.
Then, surprisingly, he smiled a real smile, sad but genuine.
Yeah, ex-fiancé sounds right.